done some of my dissertation research on. So it was really easy to kind of use a lot of that in the book. And actually the book came out only about 9 months after I had finished my dissertation. So, I was working on both at the same time. And really probably to this day, 25% of them, there's content overlap about 25% between the two documents. Yeah. So it was easy for that reason too, but predominantly it was that here's the biggest gap. Let's attack that gap. Mm-hmm. And then each book after that is kind of trying to do the same thing. Where is there a place where common wisdom and what people would call common sense is actually sort of wrong, and here's the research to prove why. That's what I really enjoy writing about and speaking about. So that's what we've been doing ever since. Creativity just happened to be the first one.
Sure. Okay. So as somebody who does keep very busy right now and balances between those two, how do you manage your time right now? Do you have like a set time of day where you're writing in between classes, or what's your average day look like? Is there an average day, I guess, is the first part.
So it's a bit unfair. So in spring of 2016, so after Under New Management came out, spring of 2017, in spring of 2016, Under New Management came out, talking about that, leading all of the invitations to work with companies and all that sort of stuff happened kind of afterwards. And in spring of 2017, I probably came really close to Hemingway, right? If you know Hemingway's life outcomes, you know what I mean? Yeah. No, I mean, that wasn't that serious, but It was a crazy stressful time in my life. Yeah. We had 2 kids. We were building a house. So there was all of that struggle. I gained probably 30 pounds just trying to just keep everything afloat and travel and, eating in airports and hotel breakfasts and all that sort of stuff, and just not being able to work out enough, et cetera. It was just a crazy stressful time. And so around that time, I also went to the university, and I was like, we got to do something. I will not come back if you're still requiring these sort of same things. And, I don't do any research, academically anymore because, I find it boring compared to being able to translate other people's research. No, it's true. Yeah. It's something you got to learn how to do, but then I would rather tell a really good story wrapped around research that helps people put it into practice than go do new research. Everybody has their sort of thing. So, and then teaching, even getting that teaching load, I had it sort of all reduced, and I'm in a role now where I still have a faculty appointment. I don't get paid anywhere near as much as I used to be a faculty member, but I still get to use that title. I teach 1 class a semester. I'm working on advising them on building a couple programs and then doing kind of the beginnings of what our university's executive education program. So I said no to a lot of stuff when things got really busy. So now I do have a regular routine, and it's a little more writer speaker focused. So, for the average day for me now, so the reason I say all of that is to tell you that teaching really only comes into play Monday afternoons from about 12:30 to about 7 p.m. That's when I'm on campus doing all of my university related stuff. Okay. Tuesday through Friday, my schedule looks like I wake up whenever one kid or another kicks me in the face, and then get them ready for school. They go off to school, and after we drop them off at the bus and at school, I come down into my office and I write or I work on whatever sort of creative project is going on. Usually it's writing either the book or writing articles that will be used to promote the book. I do that until about 10:30. There's nothing special about 10:30 other than that the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy that I train at most days has their morning practices at 11. And so that's when I meet all the guys there and work out. And I get back, and once I get showered and get some food and all that sort of stuff, I'm back in my office about 1, and then I do all of the reactive work. And that's just the schedule that works for me. The big thing, and I kind of learned this from Cal Newport, is that I separate out the reactive work, emails, podcasts, phone calls with people, all of that stuff. That all happens in the afternoon after I've done that one thing, gotten the words that I need to get, or edited the audio show or video or whatever creative thing that I'm working on, whatever project I'm on now. I do that first thing, and I do that in uninterrupted sort of deep work, to use Cal's term. And then after that's over, then go to the gym, and it's sort of like a mental stage transition. It's also just when it's open for me to do that. And then when I come back, then I can safely get into all of that reactive work. Okay. And if I have more time at the end of that, I usually don't. I might go back and write a little bit more, but usually that afternoon is full of all that sort of stuff by the time I'm usually not there. My mom helps us. She moved to she lives in a different neighborhood, but really close to us, and helps us with the kids until about 4:35. And then usually I come and kind of interact with them and get some cool time with them before we're off to some other kid thing. So that's my average non-travel for speaking day. And I think the only lesson that people can really draw from that, is, well, A, is that you should do jujitsu because it's an amazing sport. But B, you should separate out your deep work time from your reactive work time, because trying to get them to work together is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. So is the Cal Newport book about that deep work, is that the best version that you've read about, I guess, time management in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. Yeah. And then, so it was really a 1-2 punch for me.
Yeah.
It was in this spring when life was just crazy because I was trying to do all of this stuff. I read Cal's book, so I read Deep Work, and then I read Greg McKeown's Essentialism, kind of back to back. Mm-hmm. And Cal's was the jab, and Greg's was the straight right that knocked me on the canvas, and like I need to eliminate a lot of stuff in my life. But it started with that idea of I need to carve space out to do these important things, or I'm going to be reacting, and then I'm going to come to the end of my email inbox and realize that I have created nothing for months on end, and no one wants to hear from me because the well is dry, right? So that was the big realization around work schedule. And then Greg's was the big realization around that means I'm going to have to cut a lot of stuff out if I'm going to survive.
Okay, good to know. So let's then talk about your book that just came out yesterday, Friend of a Friend. So what terrible advice do you hear being said all the time about growing your network?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, I don't know where to start. I'll start with this, and I even used this term in our interview earlier. And it's, I think fundamentally at its core, there's a fundamental misunderstanding about how networks work. You'll hear people say things like build your network, grow your network, improve your network. It's not your network. You don't own a network. You exist inside of a network. The community that you want to interact with, the industry that you work in, wherever you're trying to be impactful in what you do, that network already exists, and you're privileged to be a part of it. And the appropriate response is to better understand that network. Who are you connected to? Who's a friend? Who's connected to who's a friend of a friend? This is where the title comes from, right? And where are you sort of geographically almost in that network, and then respond accordingly. And the way that as you start to do that, as you start to pay attention to the whole network, as you create value sort of for that whole network, not just try and run up the count, you end up with a much more valuable strategy. I think there's a myriad of bad advice. Mm-hmm. The so what do you do question is sort of one of them, right? But they all stem from this idea that the goal should be to run up the number of contacts that you have on your phone or on LinkedIn, connections you have on LinkedIn or whatever. And that's a recipe for disaster. The best approach is to understand that you exist inside of a network. And if you're going to impact it in any way, you've got to better understand it. And so the whole goal of the book then is to teach, here's what we know from network science about how networks work, so you can kind of audit where you are now and where you need to go based on that.
Mm-hmm. So with what you've written in your book, does it matter if somebody is, I guess, introverted versus extroverted on how they approach growing their network and thriving within this system?
Well, no, but if it does matter, the evidence might actually be in favor of introverts. So when, again, if the goal is to run up your count, then it seems like it's an extrovert's game, because they're the ones that are going to be energized in that big room full of people. Yeah. They're the ones that are going to reach out to lots of people, and they're the ones that are going to make lots of superficial connections to lots of people. Mm-hmm. But one of the principles we know from network science is this weird principle called multiplexity, which is a $2 SAT word, if ever there were one. And a multiplex tie refers to the context of connection, the number of contexts you have to connect with somebody. So if you just know someone from work, they're a uniplex tie in the language. If you know someone from work and then you also share sort of the same hobby and your kids go to the same school, that's a multiplex tie. You have a couple different reasons for connecting to that person. You know them from a couple different facets. And the research is strongly suggestive that you will build a deeper relationship faster with someone if you build a multiplex tie than a uniplex tie. Now think about extroverts versus introverts. Introverts, introverts aren't hermits, right? They don't hate people. They like people. They just don't get any energy from being in a crowded room full of people. They'd rather either be alone or with 2 or 3 other people that they trust. Introverts are more likely to have the types of conversations that lead to multiplexity, and extroverts are likely likely to run up the number of connections they have, but to just have lots of uniplex ties. Long term, I would rather have a smaller community of people around me that know me well and that I know them well, because that's more valuable in terms of what we call social capital than just know a bunch of people, have a bunch of contacts on my phone, or a bunch of people telling me what they're doing on Instagram, right? That's not going to help as much as this deep, rich connections that come from that. So no, however you're built, there's a strategy for you. I actually think the one that introverts are built for works better. And so extroverts, what you've got to learn how to do is go, okay, this is good. It's great that you get energy meeting lots of people, but you've got to slow down and take the time to get to know them. Humans are multifaceted creatures, and we need to be multifascinated with them as well.
Yeah. Is there, and maybe this is an individual thing, but is there like a magic number that people of connections somebody should have to better, I guess, be part of a network, or is it an individualistic type of thing?
Yeah, it's 150. Didn't you read No, I'm totally kidding. So when you say magic number though, most people, if they've read Gladwell or they're familiar with this research, they go to what we call Dunbar's number, which is kind of a faulty number. Dunbar made an estimate that the number is 150. That clearly can't be accurate, because in later surveys using better technology and better research methods, the average number of connections someone has is closer to around 660 or so. But I should say, when I use the term average, I'm not talking about a normative distribution, which is a fancy scientific way of describing that inverted U on a graph. Like it's not a percentile thing with standard deviations. It's actually a power law. It's a Pareto principle. And so some people have and are capable of having a disproportionate number of connections into the thousands, and other people are going to cluster to a little bit closer. So some of that is from your own personality and kind of what you can handle and what stage of life that you're in. The other reason for that is another interesting network science phenomenon called preferential attachment, which basically says that the more connections you have, the easier it is to make new connections, because your existing connections are going to be introducing you to people. What I think the reason I bring up preferential attachment is I think most people, when they think about networking and their networks, they think wherever they are, they feel like they could use a bit more, because they're staring up the power law curve of a Pareto principle and looking at those uber connected people and thinking, I should be like that, but that comes so much easier to someone else. Well, all that person's done is ridden out preferential attachment for a longer period of time. So as long as you're putting in the work, it'll get there. The rate at which it'll get there probably has something to do with what you're capable of. So it's okay if it seems like it's taking slower than you, but it's much more, it's not an average normative distribution. It's a power law, and how fast you ascend that power law really kind of depends on you. And so just kind of pay attention to what's too many, where you're drowning in contacts, et cetera. You will eventually get to the point where it's too many. Even my buddy Jason Gaynard, who runs an amazing event and probably has in the tens of thousands of connections, now will often say that his key to networking now is subtraction, not addition, figuring out who to let go of. Which is a great problem to have, but it's a very 1%er of all networks problems to have, right? But it does show you that everyone eventually gets to that point, I think, where they have to kind of scale it back. So you have to know you and what you're capable of and what feels like too much.
Yeah. So when you are, I guess, in this mode and trying to grow your network, do you need to have a specific reason to want to meet somebody, or is it okay to meet people just to meet people, just to see what happens organically?
Yes.
Fair enough.
It's perfectly acceptable, and in fact, it's probably better when you are, like, say, going to that event or joining an activity or attending a conference or something like that, to not go with an agenda in mind and just kind of, and not, because then you won't prejudge people when you meet them. So the problem with going to a lot of those events is when you have a specific thing in mind, like you definitely want to meet a certain person, or you definitely want to meet a certain type of person, you become that jerk that we all hate, that's looking over the shoulder while they're conversing with one person for another potential conversation, because they've already prejudged the person they're in front of to not be valuable, right? We all hate that person. And the truth is, we're all that person from time to time when we show up to that type of event with an agenda. So yeah, I think it's better to be open-ended in that context. On the other hand, I don't think it's a good idea to ask for an introduction to someone without a specific reason why both of you would benefit from connecting with each other. So, it's not like if I know Richard Branson, don't ask me to introduce you to Richard Branson just because it'd be cool to take a selfie with him and tell your friends you know Richard Branson, right? Yeah. That's not going to help anyone, and it's definitely not going to help you. Right. So have a reason for that type of connection, the introduction sort of connection. But I think it's probably better to be, and this is again based on that sort of idea of multiplexity, et cetera. It's probably better to be open-minded if you're going to the event